The life as a physician and being involved in healthcare for most of my career has been one that's been personally exciting and fulfilling for me, and I hope that you too can find a happy pathway for just the right career so that you can make a difference in people's lives. So I do want to hit on both of those themes today. Healthcare as a career and our university's role in healthcare. Let me begin with a story about one of our pioneers at the University of Mississippi, Dr. Jim Hardy, and events that took place in his life. So our medical school was relatively new as a four-year school in 1963 when Dr. Hardy was doing groundbreaking research in transplant surgery. So our medical school had begun in 1903 here on the Oxford campus. It was a two-year school. Students would spend 2 years here in Oxford, and then to finish their medical school experience would take their last 2 years in medical schools around the country. In 1955, the medical school moved from here in Oxford, from Gaiden Hall, which now houses our School of Education, to Jackson, so that there could be a medical school that had the third and fourth year clinical components. Needed a large hospital to do that, needed to be in a place larger than Oxford was at that time to accomplish that. And so the medical school was moved to Jackson, and Dr. Hardy was one of the original faculty members for the four-year school as it was established in Jackson. So Dr. Hardy's been doing research in transplantation for several years, and in 1963, a historic event took place at our medical center in Jackson. Dr. Hardy and a team of surgeons there performed the world's very first lung transplant. So they took a diseased lung out of a patient, looked into that empty chest where a lung was, took a healthy lung from a patient who had recently died, and placed it into the chest of this patient and extended this patient's life. At that time, a miraculous event, and we were the pioneers at the University of Mississippi in doing the world's first lung transplant. Just 2 or 3 years later, Dr. Hardy and his team were also the first to attempt a human-to-human heart transplant. That is an interesting piece of history. There were technical issues with the heart, and Dr. Hardy wound up using a chimpanzee heart to implant into this patient's chest, and it was the first attempt at a human heart transplant. A few years later, surgeons in South Africa completed the first successful human-to-human heart transplant. But Dr. Hardy was really an important pioneer in the world of transplant surgery. So, as really an interesting twist on history, on that night in 1963, when Dr. Hardy and his team were doing that lung transplant, just as they were completing the case, a call came to the operating room from the emergency room. And the most talented surgeons were there with Dr. Hardy in the operating room, and there was a call for a surgeon to come to the emergency room because there was someone there with a gunshot who was in extremis, who was going to die. It appeared, and they wanted the surgeon to come and help to try to save this patient, to revive this patient. Turns out that man who was lying in the emergency room dying of a gunshot wound was Mr. Medgar Evers. And that was a really crossing in history for our university. Of course, Mr. Evers was a pioneer in civil rights, in trying to right the wrongs of the past, the injustices of the past around race, and sadly he died that night in the emergency room at the University of Mississippi Medical Center. But that episode on that night in 1963 defines what are two important goals for us as a university in healthcare. That heart transplant is an indication that we want to be leaders in research and in taking care of patients. We want to provide the very best health care and want to be on the cutting edge of science. And Mr. Evers' death in the emergency room that night offers an opportunity for us to see the importance for us to be associated with dealing with the injustices of the past as they deal with health care. Today, there are large racial differences in health outcomes, and much of that is a vestige of the years of injustice around racial discrimination in our society, in our country, in our state. And it's an important goal of our university to be a part of improving health care for all Mississippians and to do our best to move the needle forward on solving the issues of health care disparities. Think about, why is it I should consider health care as a career? Let me just offer 2 or 3 things for you to think about. Number one, health care is going to be an important part of our economy going forward. It's going to be an important part of the growth of our economy. People are going to be sick. People are living longer. The aging is leading to more and more opportunities in health care. And then health care jobs usually provide good compensation. Now, some of you may be nervous about some of the changes that are taking place in the way health care is financed in our country and may have negative impressions about some of the changes that are taking place. Let me assure you that in this country, I'm confident that people who participate in health care are always going to be able to have good compensation. They'll make good salaries and be able to provide well for their families. I don't think that tradition is going to change in our country. And then the most important reason I would hold out for you to consider a career in health care is the personal fulfillment that it provides in making a difference in people's lives. It provides, in my view, the most tangible way for someone to live a life of service, making a difference in other people's lives, but at the same time be able to provide well for your own family. So let me share a little bit of my own pathway into a healthcare career as a way for you to think about your own life. So I was a high school student who, like most high school students in Mississippi when I was growing up, wanted to be a football player. Sadly, God didn't bless me with speed or the size I needed to be a good football player. So I was walking off the practice field one day when I was a 9th grader. The football coach put his arm on my shoulder and said, "Son, if you keep playing football, you're going to get hurt really bad." And so he talked to me about choosing some other pathway for success, and he offered me the opportunity to become the athletic trainer for the football team. Now, I didn't know anything about what a trainer was. He provided me the opportunity to get a little bit of an education in how to take care of injuries. And so I moved from being an on-the-field football player to being one that was helping to take care of the football players when they were injured and hurt. I remember at that time football shoes were not very comfortable. Socks weren't very good. Blisters on the feet was a big problem in athletes. And I can remember vividly the sense of fulfillment I had in dealing with one of our star players who we really needed to play, who got a blister on his foot and wasn't able to run. And then after I did my little tricks with helping his blister get better, things that I'd learned, and I saw him a couple of days later back out on the field and able to run comfortably, a lot faster than if we'd not had that intervention, I had this sense, well, you know what? I was an important part of helping the team win by what I was doing. It was really an aha moment for me, this fulfillment of being able to do something about somebody's health problems that would make their life better. Went on to undergraduate school and then the medical school, and for me, it was never a love of science that drew me to medicine. I know some people go into medicine because they love science and want to apply science. For me, it was always about a desire to help people, and I was good enough in science to, to follow that path and to be able to do well enough to do that. But all along the way in my training, I always felt a step behind from time to time. I can remember after I'd graduated from medical school, my first year as a resident, and we were taking care of patients who were really sick, and it all seemed too complicated for me. I wasn't sure I'd be able to do it. I remember standing in the ICU at the foot of a bed of a patient who was really sick, and the senior resident, who had 2 more years experience than me, was at the head of the bed taking care of the patient and making decisions, fast decisions, because this patient was really sick and was going to die if we didn't do something soon. And I remember watching that resident make very complex decisions and adjusting medicines and making other changes, and I watched the patient in front of my eyes move from someone who was dying to someone who was stable and then went on to a full recovery. And I can remember standing at the foot of that bed saying to the person next to me, "I'll never be able to do that." 2 years later, I was the senior resident, taking care of a very complicated patient, very similar kind of situation, just mindless about doing the things that my training had taught me to do. I was comfortable by that time doing them, made the decisions that needed to be done. The patient stabilized, went on his way to recover, and just as I was kind of finishing up with the patient, overheard two young resident physicians at the foot of the bed, and one said to the other one, "I'll never be able to do that." And it was another great moment in my pathway to becoming a physician, the understanding that though the science is complex and the training road is long and hard, most of us can do it. It's something that can be done. The education process takes care of itself, and if you think now, well, I'm not sure I could do that, if you just are willing to be disciplined and be responsible, there are lots of opportunities for you involved in healthcare, lots of different things that you can do within healthcare to make lives better for other people. Let me share a story about one more important pioneer in the University of Mississippi and our role in healthcare professions and medicine. This is the story of Dr. Arthur Gaiden. So Gaiden Hall, hosts the School of Education, is actually named for Dr. Arthur Gaiden's father, Dr. Billy Gaiden, who was dean of our medical school in the 1930s and early 1940s when it was still a two-year school here on the Oxford campus. Dr. Billy Gaiden is a hero in his own right, but that's another story for another day. Dr. Arthur Gaiden, his son, did his undergraduate years here at Ole Miss and then went to medical school at Harvard. Was a very, very bright and promising physician. Finished medical school at Harvard and was doing a residency in surgery when sadly contracted polio. Lost the use of his arms and legs and could not continue his surgery residency because of his physical disabilities. He took a period of recovery and then moved back here to Oxford, and then eventually was offered the opportunity to teach in the medical school and became the chair of the Department of Physiology, one of the basic sciences in medicine. Now, Dr. Gaiden didn't have a degree in physiology. He had a medical degree, and it was unusual for somebody without a degree in physiology to be placed in this important leadership role. But there he was as a young man, handicapped in a time when handicapped people typically didn't work in the workplace. He was disabled in a very significant way. But he took on this responsibility of teaching physiology and leading the physiology department right here on our campus, down in what is now Gaiden Hall, was housing the medical school then. In his early lectures, he kept notes, and then he was using a textbook of physiology that he didn't think really met the needs of the students, and so he took his notes and wrote a textbook. And that textbook, Gaiden's textbook of physiology, has become not only the best-selling textbook of physiology used by medical students, but we believe that textbook has been used by more medical students around the world than any other medical textbook. Dr. Gaiden has put the University of Mississippi on the map through his writing of that textbook of physiology. Now, many years later, that Gaiden's textbook of physiology is still being written by a University of Mississippi faculty member, Dr. John Hall, who chairs that department now on our Medical Center campus, is the author of that textbook and inherited that role from Dr. Gaiden. And all around the world, as medical students study physiology, they are familiar with Arthur Gaiden and his name and with the University of Mississippi. Dr. Gaiden is remarkable for a number of other ways in his personal story. He and his wife, Ruth, had 10 children, and all 10 of those children became physicians. Can you imagine the pressure that number 8, 9, and 10 were feeling along the way after all those other children had become physicians? Yeah, so one of those 10 children is actually here at the University of Mississippi now in Oxford. Dr. Gene Gispin, who runs employee health here at the university, is one of those 10 physician children from Arthur and Ruth Gaiden. Probably the most remarkable contribution that Dr. Gaiden made to the field of medicine was in training so many other chairs of physiology. So a few years ago, when there were about 120 medical schools in this country, we did a survey, and at that time there were 29 of those 120 medical schools in the U.S. who had chairs of physiology who were trained by Dr. Arthur Gaiden. So nearly a quarter of the chairs of physiology teaching at that time had been trained by this one man at the University of Mississippi. Quite a remarkable contribution to the field of medicine. One last story to tell you Dr. Gaiden's impact and intertwined with my own career in medicine. So in his research, Dr. Gaiden was the first to propose the idea that in blood pressure regulation, it was not the heart that was the primary regulator, as people had thought, or the brain, as other people had thought, but he was the one to put forward the idea that the primary organ for regulation of blood pressure was actually the kidneys. This was thought to be a crazy and strange idea when he first proposed it, but gradually over the years other physiologists have agreed, and now it's commonly accepted that the kidneys are the primary organ responsible for blood pressure control. Dr. Gaiden's research and those who followed him at our university have been the primary contributors to this fundamental idea on blood pressure control. Part of my life as a physician was spent practicing at a hospital in South Korea, and early in my time there, when I was trying to establish myself as a credible physician in another country, a young patient came to me, a teenager, who had a very difficult problem with high blood pressure. My evaluation led me to believe that his problem was from a small kidney that he'd been born with that had been causing him to have problems with the production of a hormone that helped control blood pressure. He was producing too much of this hormone that was raising blood pressure, and I came to the conclusion that removing that small remnant kidney that was abnormal from birth would be the solution to his high blood pressure. But this was still in the early days of believing that the kidney was responsible for blood pressure regulation. I'll just say that there was not a strong consensus among the physicians taking care of him that this would solve the problem, and it was a risky operation, and one a decision that I made with some trepidation. You might imagine a young American physician practicing in another country, if he made a mistake with a teenager and things didn't work out good, it could have had very difficult results for me. Using the knowledge that I'd gained at the University of Mississippi School of Medicine and my education with Dr. Gaiden, I made the bold decision to have the surgeons remove that kidney, and it did indeed lead to the solution to this young man, and his blood pressure normalized, and he's led a long and normal, healthy life after that operation took place. And I'll always be grateful to Dr. Gaiden and my education at the University of Mississippi for putting me in a particularly strong position to take care of this patient. That fulfillment of making a decision and making a life better is one that you have to experience for yourself to really understand. And today, as you think about healthcare as a career, let me just encourage you to think about what a fulfilling life it could be to commit yourself to making life better for other people through a career in healthcare.